shows it slightly washed out, but it's a very intense red, which is still to this day known as gallery red. When the gallery was restored recently, we did a lot of paint samples, and the color we use now is the closest match to the original color, which was then worked out in 1811 as the ideal color against which pictures should be shown. I mean, this is obviously debatable today, but it's part of the historical circumstances of the gallery, of the early history of the gallery. And to this day, we also have a copyright to this specific shade of red, so we're proud to say that no other museum can use it. The third interesting thing about the gallery and the hang is the fact that when you go to Dulwich, you're not going to see pictures hanging in a normal situation as you would see them at the National Gallery or in the Metropolitan Museum in New York or any other museum in the world. But you see them sort of stacked high, as you can see, almost from floor to ceiling. And this is the old traditional way of hanging pictures in the 19th century in houses and museums in Europe. And so we still do that. And usually, I keep saying the 39 Dutch Italianates downstairs are all kept in one single room, floor to ceiling. So here in Fresno will be very interesting because it's actually the first time for me as well to see some of the pictures properly down at a normal level. So the gallery is very proud because in a way it's this kind of bubble that's blocked in time. I mean, the idea is that when you come to Dulwich, you step back 200 years. But at the same time, we don't want to be stuck in the 19th century. And so a lot has been happening at the gallery recently. And a lot of this has culminated in a very interesting addition, which was open to the public in 2000, and which has allowed us to have modern spaces and facilities. And the idea is to have almost a sort of, as you can see, a sort of half cloister around the building, which interacts with the open air space outside. But in this space, we now have a lecture hall and an education center and restaurant and cafe and so on. But back to the old building, this is the sort of iconic part of the building, the mausoleum that I was mentioning earlier on. And if you look at the logo of Dulwich Picture Gallery downstairs on the entrance wall, you'll realize that the little architectural drawing is actually based on the top part of the mausoleum at Dulwich. And this was, as I said, built to celebrate the founders of the museum. And again, it's become a fundamentally important building in London where people have sort of copied it and used it for very different purposes. The door you can see, there are 3 doors all around it. They're fake doors, there's nothing behind those doors. Those are just symbolic doors to the afterlife. Just like the sarcophagi at the top that you can see, and the urns are obviously all empty and just decorative details. Like the altar on the left, the round Roman-style altar, they're all sort of funerary symbols to delineate the building as a funerary monument. The curious thing about this building is that this then becomes inspiration for, out of all things, the famous red phone box, English phone box. And if you look at the very top part underneath the top urn, that is the shape of the top shape of the phone box, and the windows below it are the idea of the doors to the phone box. So I haven't got a picture of it, but I'm sure you all know what it looks like. And so it's funny how a mausoleum built in the 19th century then becomes part of everyday life through the phone box. The interior of the mausoleum, again, is very dramatic and a very famous and important site in London. And it's flooded by this sort of wonderful yellow light because of the stained glass windows at the top. And it's a fairly small building, but gives it this sort of grand effect. And what you do see inside are the actual sarcophagi where the founders are buried, and you see 2 busts of the 2 main founders who we'll meet in a second, and all sorts of interesting symbols. You see in the corners, just about those are snakes biting their tails, and they're symbols of eternity and the kind of circular idea of life and how everything sort of goes on for all eternity. So this is really just to give you a sense of the building, the architecture, this combination of gallery and mausoleum. And of course now the the old apartments where the 6 old ladies used to live are used as exhibition spaces. So we have the permanent collection, we have obviously the mausoleum, the architecture, but also 3 major exhibitions every year. The gallery is known for obviously its collection of old master paintings, and the paintings that go from about 1500 with the Raphaels, which are probably our earliest pictures, up to the 1800s. But the real glories of the collection are 17th century paintings, European paintings from Italy mainly, Holland and France. And the greatest picture in the collection, that's the sort of icon and sort of mascot of the gallery in a way, is Rembrandt's Girl at a Window, which was painted in 1645, around the time when most of the Dutch Italianates downstairs have been painted. Now this obviously is the most important, the most precious, the most beloved picture of the gallery, and it's very rare for it to leave the gallery. And just to let you know that this will be one of the pictures that exceptionally will travel to New York next year, so you will be able to see it in the States for 3 months. And after that, it probably won't leave the gallery again for a very long time. But so let's go back to the gallery and the foundation. And it's all about 2 men, 2 great friends, who are actually not English. And you see them here in a wonderful watercolor by Sandby, which just kind of gives you a lot of sense of their character and what they were like. On the right is Noël Desenfants, who was French originally from somewhere near Douai, and who had studied in Paris and in France, and then had moved to England seeking fortune. His father was a shoemaker, so he came from a relatively poor background. But he decided to start a new life in London, and so moved to London and started teaching languages there. And probably through his teaching, he met a very wealthy woman who was older than him and hadn't been married, from Wales, someone called Margaret Morris. And the guys that they met, they got married, and through the marriage, Desenfants became rather wealthy and decided to start spending most of his money on, most of their money, on art. And really, it's all started off as a financial experiment in dealing in art rather than collecting. So most of the pictures that Desenfants bought in the 1770s and 80s were simply then sold on profit. Very early on, he also makes the acquaintance of the second founder of the gallery, Peter Francis Bourgeois, who you see on the left, who was much younger than Desenfants. When they met, Bourgeois was probably in his late teens, and the story goes that he was one of the pupils when Desenfants was teaching languages. But the two became very good friends, and soon after, Bourgeois' parents, who were French-Swiss, decided to return to Switzerland, and for not particularly clear reasons, decided to leave Peter Francis behind in England with the Desenfants. So in fact, they sort of adopted him and started this very sort of strange relationship between the 3 of them, which was sort of adopted parents and a kind of kid, but at the same time also sort of great friendship between the 3. And when Desenfants dies, he's the first of the 3 to die. He dies in 1807. He leaves everything to Bourgeois rather than to his wife. And when Bourgeois dies in 1811, a few years later, he leaves everything to Desenfants' widow, who is the eldest of the 3, the oldest of the lot, but survives them all. So it's a sort of very strange setup. They all live together throughout the whole of their lives, and curiously enough, no one ever seemed to have commented at the time on this being in any way odd or strange. But they're always very much seen as part of an entity, the 3 of them. Here you see the 2 male founders in their more official portraits, and so it's Desenfants on the right and Bourgeois on the left. As I said, Desenfants was interested in art as a way to achieve social prestige, as a way to achieve money, basically. Bourgeois was the one that was really interested in it. And Bourgeois was an amateur painter. You see in this portrait, for example, that he's holding a piece of paper, a letter, to sort of denote him as a man of letters. But on the left are brushes and his palettes, so that he's also very much pointed out as a painter. He became a Royal Academician later on in life, mainly through a lot of pushing and a lot of fighting for it. I have to say the 2 of them were not particularly well liked London society. And London society, of course, especially the aristocracy, were particularly against foreigners and people that were not part of their social circles. And so